We're going to start off with introductions, and Dr. Rutberg will be starting us off. He's the director for the Center for Animals and Public Policy at Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine at Tufts University. He joined the Cummings School faculty in the center in 2000. He directs the Master of Science in Animals and Public Policy program, teaches wildlife policy, wildlife in captivity, and policy communication, as well as mentors graduate and veterinary student research and internships.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for setting things up, as always. Welcome, everybody, to the 2025 edition of the open house for the Masters of Science in Animals and Public Policy. We're excited that you're here. We're excited for another year. And we're going to start off by having some of the faculty who participate in the program introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do in the master's program and a little bit about their interests in research. So Megan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hi, my name is Megan Mueller, and I'm an associate professor of human-animal interaction. My background is in developmental psychology, so I study the psychology of human-animal relationships, largely around the effects of living with pets, particularly on children and adolescents and their families. Also do some work within the area of animal-assisted interventions. And so my research focuses mainly on those areas, and I tend to mentor MAPP students who have interest in the human-animal bond or human-animal interaction in some way. In the MAPP program, I teach in the companion animal module of our Animals in Society course, which, as Dr. Ripperg, I'm sure we'll talk about, is our course that runs throughout the whole year. I also oversee the Pause for People elective, which is the elective opportunity where our students get to work with our therapy animal group, Pause for People. And I think that covers everything. Is there anything else, Dr. Ripper, you want me to say? Okay, I will then punt it to Shauna. She's next to me on Zoom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shauna Dowling-Geyer, and I'm the Associate Director of the Collaborative for Shelter Dogs, which is a program that is housed in the Center for Animals and Public Policy and connects with our shelter medicine activities here at Tufts Vet School. My interest areas and background are in social psychology, clinical psychology. I have a background in market research. I'm particularly interested in animal behavior, both wildlife and companion animal behavior. And I spent a lot of my time thinking about how behavior reflects welfare and animals' emotional state and how people perceive and interpret that behavior and how that might influence their interactions and the quality of their relationships with animals. In the MAPP program, I teach both research methods 1 and 2, and in the fall, I teach human dimensions of animal behavior, and in the spring, I teach applied animal behavior. And I will pass it to Dr. Jackman. Oh, you're on Zoom. You're still muted, Dr.
Yeah,
Jackman.
thank you. I'm having repair work done. I was trying to be quiet. I'm Jennifer Jackman, and I teach as an adjunct faculty within the MAPP program. I'm a professor. My full-time job is I'm a professor in the Politics, Policy, and International Relations Department at Salem State University, where I teach courses in American government, policy, and law, and also grassroots social movements. My research area is human dimensions of wildlife with a focus on species that are persecuted, coyotes, seals, and sharks. And I've done a lot of work with community-based organizations on Cape Cod around seals and sharks, and coyotes too. And my research on coyotes began when I was actually a student in the MAPP program, oh so many decades ago. I my career professionally had been in organizing for women's rights issues and working for national women's rights organizations. And so I made a career shift to focus on animals and public policy, and sort of did a mid-career shift into the MAPP program, which started me on the trajectory of human dimensions of wildlife research. And I've been teaching in the MAPP program for, I think it's 14 or 15 years now. In the spring, I teach a course on public policy analysis. And I also teach some classes building up to that in the fall semester as a part of the policy module. Why don't I just stop there for now?
Adam?
Yeah, I'll go. My name's Adam South. I have been a professor here for 7 years, I think. I have a PhD in biology from the Tufts Medford campus. For the MAPP program, I teach 2 different courses. Both of them are statistics-based courses. So I teach the introductory course in the fall, and then I teach the intermediate, it's a little more advanced course in the spring semester. And that's pretty much all I do for the MAPP program. And I guess it's India's turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is India Napier, and I'm an assistant professor, and I'm also a veterinarian that is board certified in laboratory animal medicine. I am a graduate of the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program here at Tufts. I graduated in 2020. I went ahead and did my residency training in the laboratory animal medicine space at MIT, and then I came back home to Cummings School. I've been here for about a year and a half now. I am responsible for teaching the laboratory animal module, and I'm very passionate about animals and research, and not only giving them a voice and being a steward for them, but also trying to understand more about analgesics for lab animals. And I also try to dabble back into the research space of developing contraceptives or birth control for the feral cat population. That was my PhD research way back when. And I'm excited to try to dive back into that while also working in the lab animal space. So welcome, and I look forward to answering questions and learning more about our visitors today.
And missing is Dr. Erin King Podzeline, who is a large animal veterinarian who teaches our farm animal module for animals in society. So before I let people go and start talking about the program, are there any questions for the faculty who are here about their interests or research? Okay, well, we will provide emails for all of our faculty. You can certainly write questions through Ginny once you have them, and we can put you in contact with anyone who is here.
Alan, can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention that applies to more than just me is that the research projects that we have mentioned, in my case, the human dimensions human dimensions of seals and sharks, rebounding populations, and coyotes often have involved MAPP students. And we've provided opportunities for MAPP students to get sort of firsthand on the ground field research experience in analyzing data from studies that has, I think, been instrumental in a number of their careers. And so that's another facet of the program, is that we have a very varied research agenda, which we welcome students to be a part of through externships or other opportunities.
Do other folks want to talk about student involvement in their research programs?
Sure, I can jump in here. I have an ongoing research project that Shauna is also involved in, where we are looking at the role of pet dogs in supporting teenagers with social anxiety. And this is a longitudinal study funded by the National Institutes of Health, where we're using sort of some mixed methods to look at these relationships over time. And we have a couple of MAPP students that are involved in that project now. We have some pieces that we can spin off for research track projects, or we often have research assistant positions available in our labs. Definitely the opportunity for students there.
I'll jump in here. I often have the opportunity to work with students looking at animals in shelters and their behavioral and emotional health, and how we can support and improve that, how we can assess their behavior and understand what, how they're doing, and what needs they need, any special supports they need, as well as how to help them be adopted more quickly. Done work with students to look at pet ownership in the community and how we can better support that with outreach programs from shelters, and looking at how owners understand behavior, and programs that could help them better understand their pet's behavior and support the human-animal bond.
I've engaged some of my students in some of the contraception work that I do on deer and wild horses, either as interns or I don't think I've had a research track student on that, but I've also mentored a variety of programs of projects on animals in zoos and other wildlife kinds of projects. So yeah. Any other thoughts? And any give you a second chance at questions from the audience?
I actually have another thought.
Oh, okay.
I know that there's a couple people interested in farm animals that registered. And so I just wanted to point out that Dr. Erin King-Podzaline, who is not here at the moment, I will be providing her contact information if anyone has any questions, but she does involve people as well. MAPP students, right, Dr. Rutberg?
Yeah, she's mentored some pretty interesting projects on mostly dairy cow welfare. She also mentored a really interesting project post-COVID on the impact of COVID on local dairy farms. The animals, but also the farmers, the farm workers, and so forth. So she's mentored some pretty interesting projects. Okay, there's a question. Cognition and sentience legislation. Do any of us work on that? Shauna, any thoughts?
I am not aware of any work we're doing that's going on about that involves the legislation. I know there are some efforts to that, but in terms of any of our students who have worked on that or work we have, no, but it doesn't mean we can't. That's a great area for someone in the MAPP program to tackle, and there are a lot of resources we can provide for work in that area. Yeah, contacts and networking. I don't know if you want to add anything, Dr. Rutberg.
Yeah, I was just going to maybe pass it over to India, because there's certainly a lot of ferment in the regulatory world and animal research about whether we should be broadening the protections to different kinds of animals like cephalopods and other invertebrates.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. So nothing too broad comes to, nothing too specific comes to mind, but I do know that there are a few bills that are coming through to redefine the definition of an animal according to USDA Animal Welfare Act, to expand to, just like Alan said, cephalopods, but also amphibians and other species that have not previously been considered. So that doesn't specifically answer your question, but there's absolutely folks that are writing bills right now, rethinking animals and what they think and how their behavior and what their needs are in terms of being able to be considered, having good welfare. And so nothing specific comes to mind, but we're finding right now in the lab animal space that there is some movement legislative wise into that space. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next 2 years if more and more bills asking those tough questions, and not just for the USDA, but also FDA, and I'm sure the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, will also be getting involved, and the public health policies will all be having to rethink their definition and their roles of animals in the space of research legislatively, for sure.
Okay, we have a couple of questions, a couple more. There's a question, are the students paired up with a specific advisor? And the answer is yes, sort of. So we assign advisors to, faculty advisors to students when they first arrive. And it becomes the sort of the job of the faculty advisor to bounce ideas off and follow your progress for a little bit. However, any student can talk to any faculty member, and often the faculty member who's assigned as your advisor initially doesn't necessarily track where your interests go. So we, in addition to the sort of initial advisor, there will also be advisors for internships in the summer and research projects, and they're not necessarily the same person who your initial advisor was. So, so that's how that goes. What do you require of the new students? Lab knowledge, animal handling experiences. We don't require any of that. We'll certainly, when you apply, we'll read about your experience with animals. It's generally helpful. People have done some work with animals, both in terms of admitting you to the program, but also in your ability to contribute to class discussions. But no, we have no specific research or animal handling sorts of requirements. This isn't at school. So, and everyone comes in with a different background. Some people have worked in wildlife rehab facilities. Some people have worked in shelters. People have just worked on farms, and some folks who are just curious and maybe have most of their experience with their own pets. Does each student have a set curriculum? I'll talk about that at 12:30. And what are the prerequisites? The only prerequisites we have is you need a bachelor's degree and a year of biology. And we define biology very broadly. So it can be intro bio, but can also be like an environmental sciences course that has a strong biology component. It could be like a biological anthropology course, a comparative psychology course. We're pretty liberal about what we accept, and consult with us about what we'll let you know. Occasionally we'll accept a student who only has like 1 semester of biology, and we'll ask them to take another semester of a biology related course before they enroll. But that's usually quite manageable, and we can advise you on that. Other questions? Any other questions on our faculty interests? Okay, well, why don't I let you all go? Or faculty go. Thank you for participating. And again, we will make it possible to probably through Ginny to contact any of us going forward to talk about our work or anything else. Okay. So anyway, welcome to the open house. As Ginny introduced me before, I teach a lot in the MAPP program. I do teach the policy module and the wildlife module in the year-long Animals in Society class. I teach a wildlife in captivity elective, which conservation medicine and DVM students also can take, and do take. I teach a course on policy communication, and I help Adam South a little bit with Stats 1, exercising my obsession about data analysis. My background is I'm actually I am trained as a zoologist. I did my initial work on behavior of large furry mammals like bison and wild horses, and did that for a number of years, taught liberal arts college biology, and then joined the Humane Society of the United States in, when was that? 1990, I guess, and worked for HSUS in their wildlife protection section for about 10 years. And I'm still associated with them for some of my research. While I was there, I started doing research on fertility control for suburban deer and for wild horses, along with policy-related work, advocacy on human-wildlife conflict, especially deer, which I essentially still do. I worked a lot with public lands and wild horse management, as well as endangered species protection, which is something I will talk with you about later on today during the class. And in addition to the teaching that I do, I still do a bunch of research on fertility control. I've been thinking a lot about wildlife ethics lately and writing about that. And I also co-direct something called the Tufts Elephant Conservation Alliance, which was co-founded with the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy of Tufts in Medford. And we sponsor fellowships for doing elephant conservation related work and other cool stuff, as well as sponsoring public talks, at least one a year, on elephant conservation. And we do have one of those coming up in late April. So we are lucky enough to be located at the Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine. The center is almost as old as the school is. The school was founded, I think, 1984. The school has always had a strong One Health component. We're interested in how animal health, human health, and environmental health all work together. We also have a strong history of pioneering ethical methods for veterinary education. So we were the first veterinary school to abolish terminal surgeries for training vet students, and we were the first veterinary school to rely on client donations of small animals for anatomy studies. So the school's education program has been very committed for as long as it's been around to treating animals well, including the animals that we use for research and teaching. So we have the center goes back almost to the beginning of the vet school, and we were designed sort of as a center to keep the veterinary community abreast of public attitudes and public beliefs about animals and how those changing beliefs might affect the veterinary profession. But of course, we also have a broader view. We are committed to, as everyone else on the vet school campus is, the belief that animal well-being and health matter. We also are committed to the tenet that animal and human well-being are linked, and that both are enhanced through improved understanding of human-animal relationships. So that sort of guides what we are and what we have always been. We sort of talked about and think about ourselves in terms of 4 areas. Human-animal relationships. So a lot of all of our work essentially is based on human-animal relationships, but in particular, some of the work that Megan and Shauna specialize in, what's called human-animal interactions, animal-assisted interventions, human-animal bond, the psychology of pet ownership. So that is clearly one area that Megan and Shauna and our students focus on. Shauna spends a lot of time, as you've heard, thinking about companion animal welfare and companion animal behavior and how those things interact, and particularly how the behavior of animals is interpreted by people and how that then feeds back into their welfare. So we're interested in supporting pet welfare, animal shelter, and the welfare of animals in shelters, looking at animal shelter policy and practice, and again, how animal behavior interacts with those kinds of things. Human-wildlife interactions is my domain. It's a sort of a special area of human-animal relationships, which is kind of different. Wildlife is different from the other kinds of animals that we talk about because it doesn't necessarily have a defined role in human society. And so wildlife is on its own, but interacts with people in really interesting ways. One of the interesting ways they interact with them is where wildlife do well in human focused habitats like urban areas and suburban areas. So I have a lot of interest in urban wildlife, in deer, in geese, in beaver, and other kinds of animals that bump up against us and interact with us in their lives as well as ours. And I'm also sort of interested in the policy and ethics of many different kinds of wildlife and how wildlife management works and what needs to change with the way wildlife is managed, including potentially the word management. And the 4th area, which Dr. Napier and Dr. King-Podzoline specialize in, is lab and farm animal welfare. What is policy like for animals that we use, in particular animals that fall under those areas where there may or may not be a lot of regulatory scrutiny. And we have, of course, an interest in food animal policy, because even though a lot of animal policy, or a lot of policy related to agriculture is not specifically about animal welfare, it very much affects animal welfare. So we're interested in how agricultural policy and food policy affect the lives of animals. So MAPP, what are we? And what are we doing? So we are uniquely an animal policy program at a veterinary school. There are now a couple of other animal policy programs. They're all at law schools, but because we're in a vet school, our advocacy tends to be very much science-based, evidence-based, and focuses on animal health and well-being. In the human-animal interactions world, there's a lot of interest in animals as tools, especially in the domain that Dr. Mueller works. Animals are talked about in their therapeutic context, but they have lives too. And animals that are used for therapy need to be scrutinized as well for whether it's good for them. And I want to stress that we are an in-person program, and this is a thoughtful choice on our half, because we're in person. We have a lot of intensive mentorship, and we have this really close community of students. And a lot of the experience of the students depends on their classmates, but we all have a chance to talk to each other and think about animals. And it's a little bit unusual to have a community outside of a vet school where the lives of animals are central. Probably many of you have had your choice to be interested in animal welfare, and animal health sort of scrutinized because it's a little bit odd in communities outside of vet schools sometimes. But you can be assured that you're safe here, both within the program and within the vet school, in believing that animals are important and their well-being is really central. So this is what we want for you as students. We want to prepare you to work in animal policy, not necessarily in advocacy specifically, but in a broader sense of advocating for animals. So we build your analytical research and communication skills. We expose you to a wide range of animal issues. So in the Animals in Society class that we've alluded to a couple of times, which everybody takes, is a full year talking about policy, about companion animals, about wildlife, about lab animals, about farm animals. So you get the whole scope, and it's very interesting to watch people, watch students go through the year, because often they'll start off being really interested in companion animals, and then they'll find out that their passion is really farm animals. So we give you a chance to see all these things and consider how you might want to make an impact and where you might want to make an impact. And the other thing that's really important for the program is giving you practice thinking about the wide range of views that exist on animals. We believe here that effective advocacy requires you to have a broad knowledge of what people think about animals and what people value in animals. And it's really different. I mean, even within communities, it's very different. And I deal with that a lot in terms of urban wildlife issues, just dealing with different sets of beliefs about how we should relate to deer or beaver or geese. But also, of course, going outside, attitudes change in space and they change in time. And so attitudes towards dogs in Kenya will be different from attitudes towards dogs in Grafton. So you need to think about those kinds of things if you're going to be an effective advocate and work for animals. So where do our graduates end up? About 30% of them end up working for animal protection organizations or conservation organizations, for nonprofits, doing advocacy or outreach, or a whole wide range of things. Many of them work for rescues, wildlife refuges, sanctuaries, and so forth. About 20% work for regional humane societies. Here, the MSPCA is one of the someone who hires a lot of our grads, actually, but they're a big shelter that also is attached with the medical facilities and also has law enforcement responsibilities in Massachusetts. So we have a lot of students who end up working for organizations like that, either in advocacy or in outreach or in behavior or a wide variety of different things. 30% of our students go off to other programs. So we probably have 15 to 20% who end up going to that school after our program. And so a lot of students come here thinking maybe they want to be vets or maybe they don't want to be a vet. And this program helps them make a decision. We've also had students come in here thinking they might want to be a vet and end up going off to law school. So different things happen. Or people decide they want to be vets after not having really thought about it. As well as PhD programs in sociology or wildlife management or a wide variety of things. We also have 3 PhD students here, at least one of whom you will meet later. And 10 to 15% go into government service, USDA. We have a number of students who work for USDA, a few who work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and a number who do staff jobs with people like Dr. Napier. So doing research compliance, either animal research related or human research related, human subject. So our students do a lot of interesting stuff, and they go off and do some really cool things. So this is just sort of a sampling of some of our more senior alumni who've gone off and done really interesting things. So we've been around now for 30 years, And so some of our early graduates have moved up the ranks, like Kate and Val Parkinson and people like that, who have really have responsibilities that are pretty impactful in terms of their impact on animals. Anyway, it's an exciting group. So let me talk a little bit about the curriculum. As sort of has been alluded to, we have a 2-track curriculum, but we also have a core curriculum. Everybody takes the core curriculum. And the 2 tracks are the research track or the applied track. The full curriculum is basically similar or identical for both tracks. And you choose your track at the end of fall semester. And if you follow the research track, your capstone project is a research project. If you follow the applied track, your capstone project is a mentored externship. We also have a number of electives, which people can do. The core curriculum, which I say everybody takes, we have Animals in Society 1 or 2, this survey course that deals with all the different pieces. Human-animal interaction seminar is part of the companion animal module that Mueller does and looks at some of the issues that he works on. Shauna teaches the Research Methods 1 class, which involves both qualitative and quantitative research skills. Adam teaches the Statistics 1 course, which is a basic biostats course, but it's way more interesting because we focus on animals and the kinds of things of articles that are relevant to animals. And then Dr. Jackman teaches the Public Policy Analysis course. So everybody does those things. We have, as I say, a bunch of electives. We have an animal law elective, which is a 1-credit elective that's sort of for that get people interested in that and sort of supplement some of the work we do in Animals in Society. I teach a wildlife in captivity elective, which I love, which involves both DVM students and MCM students and MAPP students. So we talk a lot about zoos, red pandas, like those guys. We have an animal welfare science class. Shauna teaches the 2 animal behavior classes. And we have a number of service electives associated with that mostly Shauna and Megan and other folks mentor, which is a little bit more hands-on. Pause for People is the animal assisted visitation elective, and we're flexible in terms of credits and hours for those. So past the core curriculum, for the research track students, everybody takes Statistics 2, everybody takes Research Methods 2, which really focuses a lot on the development of your research proposal. So the idea is for the research track, you work on developing your proposal in spring semester of your first year, and then you actually execute the project in summer and the fall thereafter. The independent research is the research component of it. Typically, research track students stay for an extra semester into the fall, their second fall. There's no extra tuition associated with that. But if people are really interested in pursuing their research projects, they always need another semester. And then 3 credits of the electives. These are some of the things that people have done in the way of research projects all over the place. Again, tracking the interests of the faculty, but we're pretty flexible about letting people find outside mentors. The Cape Cod Fisherman one obviously was with Dr. Jackman, and the COVID-19 one was with Dr. King, which I mentioned earlier. We do a bunch of stuff. I do a bunch of stuff with Mustangs and another graduate and so forth. So lots of possibilities for research projects. The applied track is also the core curriculum, and I teach a communicating policy positions class, which is an advocacy communications class, which is how to write for normal people as opposed to writing for professors. I really enjoy it. It's a lot of hands-on stuff. It's basically you're just writing and writing and writing. And then the mentored summer externship and 5 or more credits of electives. Here are some of the sorts of externships that people have done. A lot of these go on year after year. So MSPCA always takes a bunch of externs for the summer work. Animal Welfare Institute usually does. Anyway, a lot of these things are pretty standardized. So people find externships either on their own or through the faculty. We have a lot of contacts, and we can give you a lot of guidance about finding externships. So we don't let you leave you on your own for that. Okay, so application deadlines are February 3rd and April 1st. It's a completely online application. As we said earlier, the only actual requirements are a bachelor's degree and a year of biology or something similar with a lot of biology content. I hope that you guys will apply. And again, you can contact me or contact Ginny if you have any questions about admissions. We can hook you up also with the admissions office, and we can help you, guide you through mechanics when that happens. So, all right. So I need to take a break and get ready for our Animals in Society class. I will be talking about the Endangered Species Act for the next hour with you. After which we'll let you go and you'll get to meet with a panel of alumni. So thanks for your attention. Again, I hope you guys apply, and I'll see you in a few minutes to talk about endangered species.
Thank you. I'm staying on. So anybody, if you can stay on, you can take a quick break. Dr. Rutberg is going across the hall to get ready for the class that starts at 1. And that'll start at 1. Let's see. Is there an application date for fall? Both of those application dates are to start for the fall of 2025. Is that what you're asking? And if you want to talk, if it's easier, feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, good. I'm glad that answers the question.
Morning. Well, good afternoon. I
Hi,
was wanting
Jill.
to know. I was wanting to know what the minimum GPA is required, and if you were to have like a slightly average GPA, would experience supplement?
Absolutely. The applications are reviewed by the admissions committee on a holistic viewpoint. And so it is, there is no minimum required GPA. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what the average is, but it's somewhere in the 3s usually, but they look at everything, and experience helps, any kind of background. I know that they ask for some like maybe some faculty or someone you worked with, some sort of letters. So they look at those too, things like that. Yeah, so don't worry too much about a minimum GPA.
Thank you.
You're welcome. How much is the program, and are there any scholarships? So let's see. I have, that is a common question. I'm going to share a link with the current costs of the program right there. And for MAPP, it's about 51,000 for the year. And that is whether you do the applied track or the research track. The research track, as he said, can go up to 16 months. So it's not extra tuition, even though it could go a little longer. And scholarships, we do have, so there's a financial aid office. I can send you that link too. Where is that? That's I had that up, one sec. But either way, we have a bunch of scholarships that we've been working on. There was a diversity scholarship that started the last few years, and it kind of varies how many people qualify and apply, but it goes to the whole school. In 2003 to 2004, a MAPP student won it for 15,000. We have one of the previous directors of the CAP program, Dr. Gary Bertronic. He speaks in the program each year, and he donates towards student projects. When he talks, he wants his honorarium to go instead towards student projects. So let's see, we also have sometimes externships and research will pay, not always, so that can be worked out with your mentor if you're looking for that. There's the Tufts Institute for Environment. There's the Tisch Fellow. There's, let's see, sometimes High Provost Office, 1,000. We have a bunch of things that work on it. We also have had some donors, and through that, the externships get some money to help with transportation if you're going somewhere further away. And not like it doesn't necessarily cover it, but it's towards it. Depends on how far you go. In the research track, get some funding. And what else is there? Yeah, and you can work with your mentor. Sometimes they know of, if you're doing research, they know of some donors as well.
All right, I'm going to get started. So welcome to our visitors to the Wildlife Module, Animals in Society. Today, we're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act. Okay, and so the way we'll structure the course is we're going to do an hour with our visitors, and then we will do an hour among ourselves. So we've talked a lot about federal involvement in wildlife management, what the constraints are on the federal government and wildlife conservation. So as we discussed at length, most wildlife management and conservation is done by the states. And we'll be visiting with Mass Wildlife, the State Wildlife Management Agency folks on Friday to see their perspective and see what they do from their viewpoint as opposed to from my viewpoint. As we know, the federal role is constricted by its constitutional restrictions, by what the federal government is allowed to do. So the federal role is confined to limiting interstate commerce, import and export, treaty implementation. So we've talked about the Migratory Bird Treaty Act being something that implemented a treaty at the federal level. Control of federal property, which of course is a huge issue out west, where 80 to 90% of the land is actually owned by the federal government. We haven't talked much about navigable waterways, but the federal government also controls water. So when we're talking about sea turtles and salmon and things like that, that also falls under the federal realm. And of course, government can spend money, can tax and spend. And so those are important instruments of policy. So we also talked a little bit about the relative lack of engagement of the federal government in wildlife conservation and management until the 1970s, that mostly the states were dominant, but because problems arose that the states are not well equipped to manage, especially those involving like migratory birds and wildlife that crosses state lines and that are facing larger conservation threats, the federal government started to get involved with things like the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Wild Horse and Burrow Act. All these things come from the early 70s, as well as the involvement or the organization of CITES, of the Convention on National Trade in Endangered Species, which we will mostly talk about other times, but that is also built into the Endangered Species Act. And again, it's a treaty power that involves that allows the federal government to get involved in things. So federal government only tends to work in these particular areas. And just a reminder that laws generally tend to be written fairly broadly and that they are implemented heavily through regulations, which are passed by the executive branch according to our friends at the Administrative Procedures Act. So the regulations can be changed more readily than the language of the law. So that's our big thing. So here are the basic concepts of the Endangered Species Act, right? So it's sort of fun to read the whole thing about what the purposes of the act are, because it's very flowery, lovely early 70s language. But the relevant piece here is the purpose of the act are to provide a means whereby the ecosystems on which endangered and threatened species depend may be conserved. So in addition to, or primarily, in addition to conserving individual species, there's a broader mission built into the Endangered Species Act to conserve ecosystems, right? Understanding that species are dependent on ecosystems and you can't conserve a species without conserving its ecosystem. And in doing that, it kind of harnesses people's interest in animals. Like it's easier to focus public attention and support when you're talking about species, individual animals, pandas, right? Than on ecosystems, which is a very diffuse concept, which is sort of hard to get the public behind. So it leverages people's interest in individual species to try to accomplish larger conservation goals. And this is a strong point. If you're dealing with a species that everybody knows and loves, like pandas or eagles or whales, and the conservation ask isn't too big, right? And we'll see that as an issue. Species charisma is limited. So everybody loves polar bears. They're adorable. They live on the ice. But if you were really going to conserve polar bears, the biggest threat to polar bears is global warming. And you can't ask polar bears to drive the broader mandate of reducing CO2 emissions, right? Because otherwise, every power plant, every car sold that emits carbon potentially affects polar bears. And you can't use the Endangered Species Act to control tailpipe emissions. It's just not going to work. We're going to talk a little bit about spotted owls later, but spotted owls are kind of one of the main case studies in charisma versus economics, owls versus jobs, as we'll talk about later. So that's sort of the boundary line of the balance between the charisma of the species and the economic impact. And then you get things like American burying beetles, which have, let's just say their charisma is very narrowly appreciated. And fortunately, the conservation goals for the American burying beetles are not, they're not very well known, but they're also not very specific. And so no one will be like shutting down their farm to protect burying beetles. So anyway, this is sort of the structure of the act, right? So we're supposed to be using it to protect ecosystems, but we're using the success, the conservation of individual species to try to leverage these these larger impacts on ecosystems, and sometimes you can do that and sometimes you can't. Second part of basic concepts of the EA, of the ESA. The Endangered Species Act establishes the criteria and the procedures for listing species as endangered and threatened. Right, so endangered and threatened species are listed by executive action, by regulation. And the ESA describes the particular procedures you have to do and what criteria you have to follow to do that. Two agencies principally involved in enforcing the Endangered Species Act, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service, which is also called NOAA Fisheries, in two different departments. So Fish and Wildlife Service is in Interior, National Marine Fisheries Service is in Department of Commerce, which we have noted is an interesting thing previously. So this is another big thing about the Act. The Secretary shall make determinations required by Section A1, which is to say, the Secretary decides on listings, the agencies decide on listings solely on the basis of the best scientific and commercial data available to him or her, currently her, after conducting a review of the status of the species, blah, blah, blah. So the significance of that language is that the ESA is really inflexible about listing species. It's all about the science. Economics doesn't matter, politics doesn't matter, culture doesn't matter. No matter how much people hate the species, if the science says that the species is in trouble, you have to list it. Which is an astonishing thing. This is clearly, actually, I think that that language dates from the early 80s. But it's amazing to think that anybody ever wrote a law like that, given where we are now. So economic economic criteria and politics are explicitly excluded from the decision to list the species. Yeah. Okay, so what does it do? Once a species gets on the list, if you're endangered, the Endangered Species Act says you cannot, quote, take endangered animals. And that means very broadly defined. Take is the word that state agencies use to talk about harvest, talk about killing, hunting, fishing, and so forth. But you can't harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect. So that's the language of the law. For endangered species of animals, you can't do any of those things. And in the past, the courts have interpreted harm very broadly to include things like you can't cut down their nests, you can't cut down the trees around their nests, you can't do anything that will directly harm the animals. So habitat destruction is often included in that. So the take ban is quite absolute for endangered species. It also, consistent with the way the federal government does stuff, it bans interstate commerce, import, export of endangered species of animals and plants. I'm using animals and plants carefully here. And it also enforces this CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, which again, we'll talk about more in the future. But the federal government is now using its leverage to make sure that there is no trafficking, no commercial trafficking of endangered species, which is certainly a threat to some species. We talked about turtles previously, but not threatened turtles, not endangered turtles. Okay. This one is a big one, something that generally referred to in the trade as Section 7, which is the section of the Act that occurs. Okay, so it requires all federal agencies, even the Defense Department, to consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service when their actions might affect or harm an endangered or threatened species. Now, jumping ahead a little bit, because the federal government manages so much land, especially out west, This means that anything you do on federal land may require a consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Put a star by that. And it also does like normal things. It authorizes federal grants to the states, and to tribes and private parties for conservation, which nobody objects to. And another important piece, which also is typical of this early 70s sort of legislation, it authorizes private citizens to sue the government for non-enforcement of the act. So if the Center for Biological Diversity files a petition asking the Fish and Wildlife Service to consider listing freshwater desert fish, and they don't do it, Center for Biological Diversity can sue them, and does sue them, to at least make them potentially reconsider the decision. And it follows all those Administrative Procedure Act guidelines that we talked about earlier, and we'll revisit those a little bit. So the idea of citizen suits is really sort of an early 70s innovation. It's also in the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. So empowering citizens to sue the government is a big deal. The government has to let you sue them. It's an odd thing, but you do. And the ESA lets you do that for failure to enforce the act. Okay, so it sounds really absolute. Once you're listed, you get these absolute protections, and it sounds like it would be like really burdensome to enforce it. But there's some stuff built into the laws and the regulations that make it a little bit easier to work with. So the take provisions in the law apply only to endangered species, the ones that are in imminent risk of extinction. You can also designate a species as threatened, which is self-referentially defined as in danger of becoming endangered, or at risk of becoming endangered. So it's one level down in terms of the direness of the situation of the species. So for the take and commerce prohibitions, those can be relaxed by regulation. Grizzly bears are up there because grizzly bears are listed as threatened. Having them listed as threatened allows the Fish and Wildlife Service to write regulations that allow, for example, ranchers to shoot grizzly bears that are threatening their livestock. And we'll talk about some more of those things in a little bit. So that's one way. If you list the species as threatened instead of endangered, it provides the agency with some regulatory leeway. Kara?
I was like wondering what the I guess the qualifications for, because I know for grizzly bears too, there's some populations that are considered endangered and others threatened, and the kind of the guidelines like based defiance of like what their historical range is. I would assume that they are, like all of them would be endangered. But
sorry, what species are we talking about? Bears or something else?
I guess like in general when listing the differentiating between threatened and endangered, like what are they comparing that population to?
Right. I mean, the thing is, it's supposed to be science only, but they're looking at the magnitudes of those different threats that there are 4 different classes. So present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of habitat, overutilization. They look at those things and collect the data on those things, but there's judgment involved. It's not strictly objective. Where are we? Okay. So there are a couple other things. So this is a program about animals, but it's worth pointing out because my botanist colleagues always would get exercised about this. Take bans, even for endangered plants, don't apply to private lands. If you're a farmer, you have endangered plants on your land, you can plow them under for corn or walnut trees, whatever. What's that?
That's just plants.
Just plants. Right. So that the take prohibitions do apply to plants on federal land, but not to plants on private land. States are probably different. We'll talk about states later. Also, during, I think probably during the Clinton and Bush administrations, there were a bunch of sort of regulatory devices that that Fish and Wildlife Service came up with to help reduce the impacts of listings on private landowners. So safe harbor agreements are basically contracts that Fish and Wildlife Service will sign with a private landowner for species that are candidate species. We won't talk much about candidate species, but before they get on the list. So if the landowner promises to do certain things that will conserve the species on their land, the Fish and Wildlife Service promises that they will not have to do more if the species is uplisted, then later listed as threatened or endangered. So there are a whole bunch of little tricks like that. So 4D rules. The other big things that other big buffer for folks doing normal kinds of things that affect wildlife are things called incidental take permits. So famously, if you are a shrimp fisher person and you're out there netting shrimp and you're harvesting shrimp and your goal is to harvest shrimp, make a living and feed people, you're going to kill some sea turtles because you're going to catch some sea turtles. That would be, sea turtles are endangered. So there's most of them are anyway. There's 3 are threatened, 4 are endangered, but there's very little leeway, right? You can't kill sea turtles under the law. However, what the law does allow is incidental take permits, which means if you're doing something that's otherwise legal and normal, and you happen to kill some endangered species doing this, we will issue a permit. Fish and Wildlife Service will issue, in this case, National Marine Fisheries Service will issue a permit for you to shrimp if you put turtle excluder devices on your nets. That's a turtle excluder device. It's a sea turtle sneaking out the back of a shrimp net. So they require basically the agreement from the folks doing this to mitigate the impact in some way reasonably, and to potentially write something called the Habitat Conservation Plan. We'll talk a little bit about piping plovers later on. Piping plovers are threatened birds that live in Massachusetts and along the Atlantic coast. If they were endangered, you couldn't use the beaches that they're on, which is not really reasonable, but they're threatened. And so there are a series of measures that the state of Massachusetts has agreed to in order to allow like people to drive on beaches and have animals on beaches and things like that. So anyway, and that's in that Habitat Conservation Plan authorizes a certain amount of accidental take of piping plovers. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about spotted owls. So the northern spotted owl is an adorable bird, sort of a largish owl that lives in the Pacific Northwest. And they live in primarily old growth forests. So they need complex closed canopy forests to nest, to hunt, to do a bunch of different things. There are actually 3 subspecies. There's California spotted owls, there are Mexican spotted owls, but the big fight was over the northern spotted owl. It is a specialist predator. Mostly eats rodents. Mostly eats, in the context of old growth Northwest forest, it mostly eats wood rats and flying squirrels. And again, it has this habitat need that basically you do find them in other kinds of forests and earlier succession forests, but they tend not to breed there and they don't stay there for very long. So they need these forests, and this is the distribution. So they're basically in the Western Cascades, Olympic Mountains of Washington and Oregon. Okay, so feels like ancient history, but it's not. So because old growth trees are super valuable to the logging industry, most of the old growth forests in the Pacific Northwest had been logged by the late 1980s, mid 1980s. And as their habitat decreased, the numbers of northern spotted owls likewise declined. Because again, they need these forests for nest sites and for all these creatures that live there that they ate. But the logging industry really wanted access to the remaining old growth forest. However, most of that old growth forest was on federal land, on land managed by the US Forest Service. And so beginning in the late-ish 80s, there were a series of petitions filed with the Fish and Wildlife Service to list spotted owls as endangered or threatened. Right. Stepping back for a second, in addition to letting the government sue, because of our rights to petition that are in the Administrative Procedures Act and so on, you can petition to get a species listed as endangered or threatened. And again, there's a whole rigmarole procedure that the Fish and Wildlife Service has to go through if you file a petition for this. So anyway, a couple of organizations, one of them was Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. There was another one that asked the Fish and Wildlife Service to put northern spotted owls on the endangered species list. That's the old. It's very fun going. You go through these old records and they have them PDF'd of the old. These were all paper records back in the 1980s and 1990s. So anyway, the service from the Federal Register announces its 12-month finding on the petition to list the northern spotted owl as an endangered species. No, the finding was made that listing the owl throughout its range was not warranted. Additional data will be reviewed to monitor the owl's population status. So the Fish and Wildlife Service said no the first time around. They did not want to list the spotted owl. This is where the politics and the economics come into it. They were too scared. So after they said no, they were sued by Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund and other folks for refusing to list. And the argument, of course, was made, as we know under the Administrative Procedure Act, that they did not use the best data, that there was evidence of political and economic impacts being weighed in the decision from the record, from the administrative record of the Fish and Wildlife Service. And Fish and Wildlife Service lost the lawsuit. So, judge rules, decision was arbitrary and capricious, its discretion. Okay, so the court can't order the service to list the species. What they can do is say, look again and look harder. So that's what they did. And Fish and Wildlife Service admitted, yeah, maybe we took economic and political considerations into account. And when they looked at the data, they collected a lot more data, a lot more stuff came in. And in 1990, they said, okay, we better list them.
At what threshold do you consider something endangered? Is it kind of up to, like, are there any hard and fast rules to that?
No hard and fast rules. That is part of the problem. I mean, that you take a look at current population numbers. You take a look at current habitat extent. You look at past change in numbers and habitat. You project into the future. You look at the other regulatory mechanisms that are out there that might be protecting it, but might not be, and you make a projection. Basically, you say if the species isn't listed in 20 years, they won't have enough habitat for a viable population. So you can model that kind of thing, but as we've discussed, people always argue about that kind of stuff. In this case, it was pretty clear that with the rate at which old growth forest had been logged and the anticipated demand for old growth forest, that they would be gone. So it's a fairly safe bet. So yes, G.
While the case is going on, that stop the people that wanted the forest to be cut down, that we stopped them.
Great questions. There were fights about that. I'm making this really simple, but there were fights over Forest Service plans, over environmental impact statements associated with the forest management plans. So there was a whole complex of legal doings. I think the judge made them stop. Made the Forest Service stop giving additional logging leases while this was going on. But yeah, that's a good lawyer question. Yep. So anyway, in 1990, they bit the bullet and Fish and Wildlife Service listed northern spotted owls as threatened. Okay, again, not endangered. If they'd been listed as endangered, nobody was going to be able to touch another tree again anywhere within 20 miles of a spotted owl. Their ranges are really variable. And so that wouldn't have given the government any leeway at all. And so, but the threatened designation allowed them to write a 4D rule, which basically divided up all the Pacific Northwest forests into places that could be logged and places that couldn't be logged. So it gave a little bit to the timber companies, but not a lot. This was really interesting to live through. Again, the ESA listing mattered because of the Section 7 problem, right? So there's a take problem and there's a Section 7 problem. So the Section 7 problem requires that all timber sales on federal lands could not jeopardize the conservation of the northern spotted owl. And since we're talking about mostly federal lands, there's all this federal jurisdiction there. So between the take bans and the consultation requirements, it meant that there would have to be a lot of cutback of logging on federal lands. Lots of stuff went on at the time. So the standard industry argument was that if this happened, if the spotted owl was listed, the 14,000 jobs would be lost. All these families and all these logging communities would be destroyed. The timber mills would be destroyed. There would be nothing left of the industry, which was a little bit of an exaggeration, but it definitely had impacts. It definitely had impacts. On the other hand, Oregon and Washington were becoming less and less dependent on logging for their economies. Both states have very diverse economies based on fishing, based on manufacturing, based on power generation. There's all sorts of other stuff. So the logging industry was a shrinking part of the economies of these two states. But that doesn't help you if you're a logger. So there were some really, really, really bad feelings, which are reflected in this. I couldn't believe I could find this. This was on Amazon. 101 uses for a dead spotted owl from 1989. So this was published in 1989, and bonus author's 10 favorite recipes. So there were all sorts of bumper stickers like that one: save a logger, eat an owl. And it was ugly. And so especially with the change in administration, with Bruce Babbitt as the Secretary of Interior, they mostly got through it. People lost their jobs for sure. And so there was pain, but because of the way the act is written, there really wasn't any choice. They had to listen. And the threatened listing was the way to soften it. Yes.
Do you know what, like, how they decided which lands would be used for, logging? So they were like isolating ones.
Yeah, they took a map and they argued over this map of all the Forest Service tracts. And so it was a negotiation. I don't know if there were anything that was going to be, anything that was occupied spotted owl habitat where nests have been documented was going to be protected. But then, there's probably a lot of land where it wasn't so well documented. So they argued about it. So it was a negotiation with the industry. So again, this is the tipping point argument. People like spotted owls, but people also want wood and feel bad about the loggers, and loggers are entitled to be represented. So it was the balancing point. Okay, so that was a long time ago. There is an epilogue here. Spotted owls have continued to decline. Part of that is continued erosion of their habitat. But part of it also is that barred owls have entered the Pacific Northwest. Barred, B-A-R-R-E-D, yes. B-A-R-R-E-D, barred owls, not barn owls. Those are not barn owls. So anyway, so here's the deal with barred owls. First of all, they're everywhere around here. They're really cute. They're native to the east. They are the species on the right. Spotted owls are the ones on the left. Barred owls on the right. They look pretty similar, don't they? They're very closely related. Okay, they're same genus. There's a lot of birds that for which there are two separate species on either coast that are otherwise pretty identical because they were separated by the glaciers essentially, and they evolved separately. They were divided, but they're basically the same species. So barred owls started finding their way across the country, found their way to the Pacific Northwest. Did we move them? No, we did not move them. They did this all by themselves. But of course, they may have been helped out by the fact that, we have more forests. We've restored some forests and created some places that they like. The problem with in the Pacific Northwest is they outcompete spotted owls. They are bigger. They are more generalist predators, which is to say they eat more things than spotted owls do. And it's very, very common in the ecology world for if a generalist species runs into a closely related specialist species, the general species is going to win. So the data started to show that spotted owl populations were declining where there were barred owls. And so there was an experiment done maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, where the Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to know if they removed barred owls. Look, I know. If they remove barred owls, which is the ornithological word for shooting, if they shot out a bunch of barred owls, would that improve the survival and reproduction of spotted owls? And it did, a little bit. So based on the results of this experiment, Fish and Wildlife Service now has a plan to shoot 300,000 barred owls over the next 30 years to protect spotted owls. So what do you think? Is this a good plan? People are shaking their heads no. Ruby, what?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
It's not like a good permanent plan, but I was like long-term solving anything that works. Will be in favor.
So right, so it's something that you have to do forever, potentially, unless barred owls give up or something like that, which they either way. Sorry, Jenna.
I feel like we shouldn't get that involved in this natural process.
Right, and so there's a big argument about whether this is a natural process or not. And so if this is just a natural process of one species moving from one part of the country to another, then we should leave it alone. But if this movement has been facilitated by human reconstruction of the environment, by habitat, changes in the habitat that are made possible because people do, and they are taking advantage of human activities, does that mean that, is it natural or is it not natural?
But like, what are also?
Okay, Jean.
What are like the long, I mean, like, how do we know what the consequences are of like them shooting that many barred? Like, how do you know how many barred owls to shoot? Like, how much is too much? Like, I don't know, like, what are the costs of the intervention? What are you doing with all the dead owls? Like,
I
do
guess
you have the
rescues,
right to
right?
take that many owls? Like, I don't know, like ethically, like why are you entitled to kill those owls? Like, it's not those owls' fault that like we've changed the landscape. Why do we get to determine that they don't get to live anymore? I think that's the argument of whether or not it's a natural or unnatural, like whether or not we should intervene or anything, like we brought, or not brought, but like facilitated their migration there. But I agree with you. I also wonder, like, the ramifications of shooting in a forest. That's what I was thinking. All of the owls.
All the lead, you mean?
Yeah, and do they don't use lead ammunition.
I don't know what they do for shooting owls.
The sound pollution and the effect on other animals was something I was. Yeah, or if since they're closely related, if they see a bunch of like, are they gonna associate like a bunch of dead owls with like, like gunshots, and then they're gonna like. I don't know.
Does this create, so I'm guessing is the culling gonna happen in one geography, or they're all over the place, so it's like a free for all, right?
I don't know if it's geographically restricted, but it's probably pretty broad.
So does it create jobs for people, are they like specialized hunters over there, like shoot the owls? Because there's an argument for, but let's get it done and create like.
Change the law.
Jobs hiring people to shoot owls, yeah.
But then like, what do you like, would that like create a bounty system for?
For sure, I'm not saying it's a good idea, I think it's a terrible idea. We kind of went over this in one of the other classes, and like everyone, we should, it's a bad idea.
And then look
Okay,
very
go ahead.
So that's.
They do.
Not shooting the wrong owl.
Friendly fire.
And it's in danger, not threatened, so there's no incident.
For the 30-year execution sentence, at what year number are we on right now?
Oh, we're on year number 1.
Okay, so-
We just started, yeah.
Okay.
Maybe year number 2. I think maybe they started last year. Yeah.
How genuinely trained are these people gonna be in spotting the difference between these two very similar looking owls?
So.
Well, that sort of rules out the private citizen doing it, right? So it has to be like Fish and Wildlife or state fish and wildlife specialists. But yeah, they're going to kill some of the wrong owls sometimes,
Yeah.
for sure.
So are we stating in this case that the barred owls would? Are we saying basically that they wouldn't have moved into that area if there were northern spotted owls there, or is it solely due to the fact that they're out competing them now that they are there? Like, can we prove that they would have migrated there even if the forests were still their original size? Because if that's the
That's a good
case,
question.
then I feel like naturally they would have outcompeted them because they're not such specialized predators. So eventually, even if humans didn't exist.
Right, so we're going deeply into the realm of hypothetical, but
Right.
if the Northwest forests, the old growth forests were intact, it would probably take a lot longer for barred owls to get in there. Maybe. So
Were they, do we know that how, describe to me the migration of the barred owl? How did they get there?
I don't, I don't know what they take advantage of. They love like suburban woodlots. So, so they would have crossed the country hopping suburbs, maybe. So I say it was probably, 5 pairs out in the woods behind the science building. Yeah.
They have to.
Oh, I hear them all the time at bedtime. Yeah, they're hooting at night. And they seem to have a thing with the great horned owls. So you hear one or the other. Great horned owls tend to push out barred owls. Okay. So, but of course, they're also probably, I wonder if they're great horned owls they probably are. Right. Anyway, so.
To take out the barred
Yeah.
owls. They're gonna take out the barred owls, and then we just stay silent.
Yeah. What?
Are we doing this solely to restore the population of this?
Spotted owls, yes.
So what happens if that population goes extinct?
Anyway, well, then I guess you stop shooting the barred owls and you let the barred owls take over, which is what they're going to do anyway.
Ecological impact of letting the species go extinct.
I don't know.
Seems like it's.
I was just thinking the barred owls are
Hmm?
filling the niche, like if they're filling that hole, that they're like, spotted owls are.
Maybe some
predators fly more than spotted owls have.
No, but they-
Okay. So Ashley?
My question was, are spotted owls still considered just threatened or have
Yes.
they moved up to endangered?
That's a great
Because
question.
that would, because I was, in my head, I was like, oh, they're endangered, not threatened, and that would impact the ramifications of incidentally taking in the bounty, but if they're just threatened, then.
They're still threatened, but maybe you need to file a petition to have them uplisted to endangered. Okay, enough owls. We can talk about this more later. Couple other things I want to talk about. Weird things about the Endangered Species Act. Remember him? I know, I won't leave that up there alone because I realize I hate looking at it. So there are lots of people who own endangered species. How come? And the answer is the Endangered Species Act does not ban possession, right? Because it's that federal thing. You can talk about you can ban interstate commerce, you can ban import and export, but the Endangered Species Act does not ban possession. Now, as it happened with him, is he abused the heck out of his tigers, and you're allowed to have captive wildlife permits under the law and under the regulations, and it's super complicated. But for endangered and threatened species, you can have these guys for have endangered species for conservation purposes, for scientific purposes. For threatened species, also educational purposes. So you can get a permit to own endangered species. He didn't have them. And of course he tried to kill Carol Baskin. So he ended up going to jail. But now that the Big Cat Public Safety Act has been passed, there's further restrictions on owning tigers specifically. But the ESA doesn't help you too much with possession of endangered species. So enough of that. I don't want to look at him anymore. Okay, one more weird question about the ESA. So I could be a trophy hunter. I can go to Africa. I can shoot an elephant legally in their country, and bring back the trophies, bring back the tusks. Ew. You can, and it's legal. Their condition, it's again, elephants are threatened. African elephants are threatened. Asian elephants are endangered. You can't touch endangered Asian elephants. But for African elephants, you can bring back the trophies because there's a 4D rule for elephants that allows people to bring back tusks if it is for conservation purposes. Right. And so if you've gone off and you've given $75,000 to the conservation agency in Zimbabwe, that counts. And so you can bring them in. You can't sell them. You can't bring tusks in for commercial purposes, but you can bring them up to display and brag. So Fish and Wildlife Service has been under a lot of pressure for that one. We'll see what happens. Yeah.
You still sell like vintage ivory or ivory with like a past certain age or thin.
Yeah. The law contains exemptions for antique ivory. But it's got to be, you need to have the documentation that it is antique. You can't just say, oh, this is antique ivory, I'm going to sell it. You actually have to have the receipts. So, big questions. Does it work? This is a framing question. Same data. We're almost done here. Same data. If you are a conservation advocacy organization trying to defend the Endangered Species Act, you say, yes, it works great. The ESA is our nation's most effective law to protect at-risk species from extinction with a stellar success rate. I've seen that stellar in other places too. 99% of species listed on it have avoided extinction. Ta-da, it works.
World Wildlife Fund.
We'll let that go. I could have used somebody else, but I decided to use that. But okay, so they're defending the Endangered Species Act, as they've done for many years. On the other hand, the purpose of the ESA is to recover endangered species, yet this is where the current law is failing and failing badly. Of the species listed under the ESA in the past 38 years, only 20 have been declared recovered. That's a 1% recovery rate. Kara.
I was wondering, like, I guess for those 20 that have been recovered, how is it common for something to be recovered and then go back? Like, I saw that with grizzly bears too, where like they constantly, I mean, there's like this back and forth where like, oh, they get taken off and then they get put back on. And I guess for those, I mean, or 20 have only been, they have.
Yeah, so, gray whales, bald eagles, a bunch that are less well known. And they have recovered. The deal with grizzly bears and wolves is, of course, that's all court action. So the Fish and Wildlife Service says, we're going to delist them. They get sued. The judge says, no, you're not, because you did something illegal. And so that's what the back and forth has been mostly for bears and wolves. I can't think of any cases where that doesn't mean there haven't been any, but there have been no obvious cases where the Fish and Wildlife Service has, through regulations, relisted something that they delisted. That's not usually the way that works. In fact, there's actually no language in the law about how you delist a species. Very weird. Yeah. So anyway, this is a framing issue. It's a smashing success, a stellar success, because 99% of the listed species are still alive, and it's a total failure because they're supposed to be recovered and nobody's recovering. So, so that's our lesson in framing. Okay, so I have to let them go. So thank you for being there. Oh, okay, so Miley and Sophia are still there. Good. So we're going to take a short break. I'm going to get us off this link and set up another link for Miley and Sophia. So thank you all for attending. Hope you learned something about the ESA. Here's the last one.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Hi, Katie.
All right.
So what we'll probably start off by doing is letting everyone go around and introduce themselves and, say your name, your graduation date, and your current job. Do you want me to start it off and whoever talks picks the next person? Okay. How about Bethany? Perfect.
Yes. Well, it's so bad. Time flies by. I'm like, oh my gosh, when did I graduate?
It
But it
feels
also
like
feels like I was
yesterday.
just there. Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Bethany. Um, I graduated the MAPP program in 2022, I believe. And right now I am working for the MSPCA. If anyone is familiar with it, it's a state-based animal welfare organization, and I'm the advocacy and community engagement coordinator. All right, Erin, you're next.
Sounds good. Hi everyone, I'm Erin King. I graduated the MAPP program in 2016 or 2017, depending on which year you want to go with. But I started in the class of 2015. And I am currently a senior PhD student at the Center for Animals and Public Policy with Dr. Megan Mueller. And I am set to defend this semester, actually, next month. So that's what I'm doing now. And since I graduated, I have worked at the university still at the veterinary school, working in community medicine department and with Tisch College. So I work in accessible care as well as getting veterinary students into the communities and working with different programming. Let's go with Anne.
Okay, great. My name is Ann Linder. I graduated in the class of 2014, I think. Right now I work as the Associate Director of Research and Policy at Harvard Law School's Animal Law and Policy program. We're an academic program that's sort of focused on exactly what it sounds like, animal law and policy. And we do that across sort of a lot of different mediums. We have visiting fellows come through for project-based fellowships. And then we also sort of do our independent like research writing, academic writing in this area. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to kick it over to Kaylee.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, I'm Kaylee. I graduated in the same class as Anne. After graduation, I worked for the Humane Society of the United States as a senior wildlife program manager. Did a lot of cool stuff there. I have since stopped working, and I'm back at Tufts as a PhD student with Dr. Rutberg. And I'm in New Hampshire. And who's ever left? Catherine.
I'm Catherine Holthouse. I work at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I've been there for almost 16 years, I think. So I graduated in 2008, I believe. So quite a while ago. And I work in research operations and oversee the Animal Care and Use Committee for research at the hospital. And I think Anne Goodall, have you gone yet? Okay.
Hi, I'm Ann Goodall. I was in Erin's class of 2016. Since MAPP, I worked for a little bit in as a vet tech, and then eventually went back to vet school. So I'm currently the intern veterinarian at NC State Turtle Rescue Team and the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So I deal a lot with wildlife. And then on the other hand, I deal with animals as part of a typical living collection.
I think we have Ariel left.
All right. Hello. My name is Ariel Lefkowitz, and I currently work at the Humane Society of the United States. And I graduated from the Tufts MAPP program in 2019. I guess technically did the ceremony in 2020. And I work on the Stop Puppy Mills campaign as a public policy specialist.
Sarah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you wanted to say hi to everyone and say where you went to college and if you have any special interests, feel free.
Sure. So I'm a current senior at Bucknell University. I have a double major in animal behavior and political science. So right now I'm just exploring different avenues for, next steps after graduation. And I've met a lot of people who have done the MAPP program through various internships that I have been in. This summer I was interning with the Animal Welfare Institute. And so I went to HSUS's Taking Action for Animals conference, and I swear everybody there had done the MAPP program. So it sounds like a good opportunity that I'm excited to learn more about.
That's awesome. You're the second person who registered who said they learned about MAPP that way. But I think, let me see, did you also come to Cummings School Open House one time?
I did, and I think I would have liked it more if there was more information about the master's program there. It seemed very much more directed towards prospective vet students. So it was nice to see the campus, but I'm glad you guys are having this event so I can hear more about this particular program, because it's obviously which one I'm interested in.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad we met you at the open house there too, at least. So do you have any questions off the top of your head for any of the students? I mean, alums? Sorry.
I mean, I think it would be interesting to know, I guess, for each of them, maybe what did they do, the research track or the applied track, and then I guess maybe what their project was, and then I guess what their externship was, and if it's maybe the same field that they're in now, and then if it's not, maybe how did they get into that new field?
It's a great question. Anne, I'm gonna start you off because you're at the top of my list. Sure. Thanks.
A is always first for everything, so I'm used to being called on. So I am old enough that we didn't have a research track and applied track. When I was there, we did do sort of comparable things though. We had kind of a sort of independent study project that we focused on. So mine was related to Endangered Species Act work, looking at kind of the outcomes of Endangered Species Act cases, seeing if they were more likely to result in convictions when the animal in question was more closely related to humans. When, do you have a higher conviction rate for mammals versus crimes against birds or reptiles, other sorts of animals. So that was what I sort of did my research project on. And then throughout the semester, we did do an externship in January. So I did that with Kaylee actually down in Florida for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That was really great. I learned a lot through that experience and was able to kind of write a paper from that externship that I was then later able to publish when I was a law student. So so we had kind of several opportunities to do that kind of in-depth work, but it wasn't sort of delineated in the way it is now as research or applied. We had a little bit of both, which was great. As far as whether I'm still working in that space, I've done, since I've graduated, a little bit of everything. I worked in, farm to animal investigations for a while. I've worked in shelter settings. I've worked, looking at wildlife trade and trafficking. So I've kind of tried to take this sampler platter approach, and I think MAPP has sort of prepared me really well for that, because you get to dabble in a lot of different things. So if you're like me and you're interested in all of it, it's a great way to kind of get exposure across a lot of different fields, and that I think you can look at that sort of externship option as this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, and I want the rest of my life to start right now. Or you can look at it as like, this is something that I may or may not go into, but this is maybe like an opportunity to get exposure to it that I wouldn't have otherwise if I'm going to spend my career in a different sort of field. So I was more in the second camp, and that was my experience. Should I pass it sideways to Kaylee? She's next to me here on my screen, at least.
Cool, Anne, thanks. Yeah, Anne and I did the externship project, which again, we didn't have the applied versus research track, so we did kind of both. I spent the whole time in Florida doing some sort of local wildlife stuff. And then for my research project, I went back to Massachusetts and did a study on harbor seals in Cape Cod. And I guess both of those things I took with me to my job and then back into the research that I'm working on now. So for me, it stayed pretty on course. But I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be doing any of those things when I started the program. So I definitely spent my time as a student really just trying everything. So I would encourage you to be open-minded and just treat it like an opportunity to get exposure, like Anne had suggested. I'll pass it to Ariel.
All right. So I did the research track during my time at the program and was actually a little bit apprehensive, went back and forth on which one to do because I was very interested specifically in doing policy, and so doing the applied track seemed to make more sense. But my project was on my passion subject, which is looking at breed type and exploring the impact of breed type on people's perceptions of a dog's behavior and personality, because I have a huge love for pit bull type dogs. And so I worked with Shauna Dowling-Geyer, who was my mentor, and did a mixed methods study on that. At the same time, I did decide to do the communicating policy class because if I wasn't going to be doing the applied track, then at least I could get some experience and those same skills that way. So I will say that I enjoyed doing the research track, one, because I got to really zone in on a topic that I was super interested in. Two, because there are a lot of people that I've met since then who are also pit bull type dog lovers. And so it's something that bonds me with some people oftentimes. And and then it's I think diving in on the research aspect of things, although we have the like research methods class and we have things that help us critically review research studies, things like that. It just helps you dive in that much deeper, and then and then when studies are being referenced for policy, for legislation, you can look at what is actually being referenced and be like, okay, well, hang on. I think you're pulling some conclusions out of thin air or like stretching this data farther than it was actually going, kind of thing. And forgive me if I didn't answer all of the questions, but that's what I did. I will kick it to Bethany.
Yes. So I did not do the research track. I did the applied track because I learned through the MAPP program that research is not my strong suit. So I was like, I'm gonna do the applied. I kind of already knew that going into it. And I'm not sure, Sarah, if they've already discussed this. So if I'm repeating anything, I'm sorry, but every MAPP student is assigned a mentor, and it's really just they try to, pair you with someone who may be an expert in the field, and can help you figure that out. So I met with my mentor a lot, and she really helped guide me in figuring out which one would be best. Well, I already knew it was going to be the applied, but then trying to figure out what externship would be best, what organization I might connect with. And I did my externship at the MSPCA where I'm working now. And that really, really helped me figure out, well, first, if I like working on state legislation. But also I learned how, just all the behind the scenes work of state government. So it really helped helped me get a good sense of what the MSPCA does, how state legislation works. I was able to apply a lot of things that we learned specifically in classes to my externship, which was really cool because sometimes I thought, okay, is this actually necessary that we're learning this? But then you apply it to something and you're like, oh my gosh, this is actually what's going on. And yeah, so I did my externship there and then they offered me a job right after. So it kind of shows how just like doing the applied track, I got an externship, learned that I loved where I was, and then was able to get a job after. It really worked in my favor. Um, but like everyone else, everyone has different stories. So whether you choose research track or the applied track, it's going to all work out, especially because the mentors are going to guide you in the correct directions no matter what. Okay. Anne Goodall.
So my experience was the applied track. I did my internship for the summer at an aquarium. I was looking at interspecific and intraspecific interactions between beluga whales, so with one another, and then with their counterparts in their exhibit, which were harbor seals. Basically was trying to see if having a multi-species exhibit, which is a little bit newer on the spectrum of enrichment and systems in aquaria. And so I was curious if having multiple species would influence the animal's natural repertoire, which I saw that it did, which was really cool. I definitely, that for me was like a game changer. My path to my career is a little bit different in the sense that I did MAPP, loved it, gained so much from it, did my externship, and was like, oh my gosh, I think I want to be a veterinarian. I had not been pre-med in undergrad. I never like really thought medicine was for me. And so it was like a total 180, and it was a really, really magnificent opportunity, predominantly because it's a little bit of a challenging field to get into. And so having that experience before even starting vet school was really crucial. And then it allowed me to go on and do some other pretty competitive internships, like working in the pathology lab at the Marine Mammal Center. And those fundamentally helped me by the time I did go to vet school and I was on clinics. It was really easy for me to secure externships, so clinical rotations at some of the pretty fantastic aquariums that are across the country. So for me, it really, really set me up for success. Frankly, like years down the line, again, I did MAPP in 2016 and I just finished up clinics last year. So it has had a pretty enduring effect for helping me get to where I am now. I think there were certain components of it that I was super, super grateful now as a clinician. So for example, while at my internship, we had a USDA inspection and I remember thinking it was really scary. And then it ended up being very manageable and is something that now, like, I just got an email that I have an IACUC inspection next month. And so getting exposure to those sorts of things and kind of taking the fear away of them and understanding that everyone's working towards a goal to try to make sure that the systems and the animals within them are well cared for, rather than this big scary inspection where it seems like they're coming at you and that it can be very intense. So it just opened up a lot of ability to have conversations. And undoubtedly, I use this degree every single day. It's something that, whether again, it's something like inspections or I talk with the public a lot, and just having the ability to communicate and have an effective framework is something that as a clinician, I absolutely use all the time and is unfortunately something they don't really teach you in vet school. So having that background going in was really helpful.
I didn't know that about you, that you didn't have a vet background before, or even medicine background before coming to MAPP. That's, wow, learn something new every day. Who hasn't gone yet? Let's see.
Oh, I have, so I'm Erin
Thank
again.
you.
Yeah, and Anne and I were the first year that they had split the applied and the research track. And so I decided to do the research track because I knew that I was interested in a PhD in the future. And my project looked at the connection between animal abuse and human conflict. So specifically, I worked with the ASPCA and did a lot of archival data mining and looking at the context of animal cruelty and what human violence was associated with that. And excuse me, I'd say the job that I've been in here at this school has been really great in that it really focuses on social determinants of health and why they matter in veterinary care and thinking about the more human side of patient medicine, which is really great. And I think that the most valuable thing from the MAPP program, besides, you know, the connections and having a great social network and keeping in touch with everyone in that way, I think it really gives you a broad foundation to understand a wide depth, you know, wide breadth of human animal interaction issues. And in that way, I'm really grateful because I feel like I have had a multifaceted, you know, education around a lot of these animal issues. And unfortunately, I do have to hop off early, but good to see everyone.
So I understand you're teaching after this. What are you teaching?
I am, yeah. I've been the past few years I've been teaching in the DVM curriculum. So I teach about how to engage in different communities in veterinary medicine and what are the social determinants of health that veterinarians need to be aware of in order to create more cohesive patient care plans that are also centered in the owner's perspective. And then I also teach in the master's program. I got the opportunity this past year, so I teach research methods in the master's program as well. So it's been a really nice way to tie in some of these master students and getting to know the DVM students as well. But yes, classes, and gotta get going over there. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for spending time. You're so busy, but it was so good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It was great to see everyone.
And I think we have Catherine next. Yes?
Yes, I haven't gone yet. I'm Catherine. And I just realized my dog's been like snoring, sitting in my lap. So I apologize if you can all hear like weird snoring in the background. She's a tiny, tiny old Chihuahua. So she just sits there all day.
Oh my gosh. Didn't hear it, but so cute. Thank you for sharing.
So I was in, again, like graduated 2008. So it was well before the time where they split into two tracks. So we just had one track where everyone did some research, not applied hands-on research, but you know, kind of just researching in general. And I don't so I researched like vaccination scheduling in veterinary medicine and how I guess back in the day, like back in that time, like a lot of vaccines were like every year, like annual vaccines. And it was a little bit more to get the animals to come in to the veterinary clinic to make sure that the vets were seeing the animals on an annual schedule. And then as they started approving a lot of the like cat vaccines for like every 3 years, some of them they've tested out every 7 years, but they still only have it approved for every 3 years to make sure that animals are coming in on some regular schedule. So I was just kind of looking on the like impact of that on the client veterinarian patient relationship and kind of why some of these kind of policies, even though they're not, you know what I mean? It's like labeling policies and how that kind of like interplays with, you know, practice and catching, you know, diseases and I don't know. So it was something I was interested in and I knew it wasn't something I was going to do, but that's why I decided to do something that was not going to be the area that I worked in to kind of get the most out of the program and try to push myself in a different direction than what I would more likely be doing. So I work in research operations now. I read a lot of like straight applied research on a daily basis in order to ensure animal welfare for any of the animals that are being used in research. And I do a lot of training with our researchers and yeah, so I'd say in general, like doing a lot of like quarterly trainings and help designing training for the researchers. So I do a lot of that. I use like the statistics that we learned, you know, to be able to like look at and make sure people are like calculating the power and using the right number of animals, and not just, saying, oh, I need 100 mice for something, that they're actually being thoughtful. And, we have, it's more likely that they need 7 or 8 mice, for a particular study. So being able to go through, and I really do feel like I use like many aspects of the program on a daily basis in what I do. And I work with a whole bunch of veterinarians now, and I think that helps, like a lot of what I learned in about veterinary medicine at the program, like informs how I interact on a daily basis as well. So I definitely feel like it was valuable, and it was a good way to like explore different areas and confirm, like I ended up I came from research. I was like pre-veterinary medicine. And I was thinking, okay, should I go to veterinary school? Should I do something different? And it was just a way to kind of explore like what I wanted to do. And I ended up going back into like the research world, but not as much hands-on, more from like the oversight regulatory piece, which I really liked learning about in MAPP. Was there anything else I was supposed to say or not?
No, I think that
Did I
was
get
great.
everything?
I was learning more about you today again. That's amazing, that you still use MAPP so much. Sarah, do you have any other questions for any of the alums?
I think that was just my main question, was just hearing about their different experiences. I don't think I have anything else.
Do you have any specific interests that you know of right now? It's funny because I watch alums come in with interests and then completely change. I remember watching Ariel. Actually, I thought you were going to go into farm animal for a bit. I think we watched a movie and I was like, oh, that looks like a turning point.
I thought the same thing.
Really? Do you
Yeah, I
remember what
thought
that was? What
it
was that movie?
was,
Do you remember?
oh gosh, it was a documentary that was shown to us. And I can't remember if it was like compassion for animals in farming or a different organization that had sponsored it, but it just showed the different layers of abuse and exploitation that are involved in industrialized farming, and how it affects the laborers on every level, the people living in the communities around those farms, the animals, it was extraordinarily heavy, but it was extraordinarily important to see. And so, I think farm animal work is still in my future because that is something that is also directly tied to the environment, which is something that I have equal concerns about. But yeah, but just the way that the honestly job search worked out, I ended up in companion animal issues first.
It makes sense. Um, let's see. Sarah, do you have any specific interests that you have right now? I know you're learning about MAPP through AWI, so I'm kind of
I'd say
curious.
where I've mainly been doing internships and volunteer positions has all been horse related. And I think it's because I grew up riding horses. So that was kind of my like into kind of the policy world, because that's what I was knowledgeable about. And then I've kind of been sucked into that pathway because I started with it. But I think I'd like to try more avenues because I'm not sure if it's where I want to stay. I'd say more recently, I've gotten very interested in like the ethics of killing invasive species. Just I think that's a kind of a nuanced topic that not a lot of people have talked about yet. Especially with, I know like there's the owl situation in California right now where I think it's the barred owls that are invasive, and they're like trying to decide if they should go in and kill them because they're competing with native species. So I think that would be a topic I would be interested in exploring more.
Did you hear the class like an
They
hour
did
ago?
talk about it a little bit. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting.
I thought you might find that interesting. Um, I'm not sure how much work these alums have done with invasive species.
I speak to that just a tiny bit in that, so for the last few years, I've been co-teaching the animal law course. And this is sort of definitely a rapidly evolving area of law, particularly as climate change continues to accelerate and displace species, and sort of what does it even mean to be invasive, right? If your natural range and the areas in which you can survive are moving, those animals are going to have to move with those habitats, right? And critical habitat area doesn't move on the map just because, climate is changing or because of large sort of wildfires and things like that. And so that's sort of a question that I'd like to get more involved in. If I do work with this course again, is looking at sort of the policy tools we have, like the Endangered Species Act, and those pieces of legislation and regulation are going to continue to be tested and see how they can flex and adapt when we are talking about things like assisted migration and having to sort of pick up species and move them to new habitats in order to avoid losing them, and how is that provided for or not provided for by the different kinds of policy tools that we have now. But I think that's definitely sort of an interesting area to watch. We're gonna get a lot more questions, I think, ethically and legally and in many other senses before we get a lot of answers there. But yeah, just if that's sort of helpful or of interest to you at all, it's something we touch on briefly in that course.
I will say personally in my career, that's something that I've had to do and is definitely a challenge. I work predominantly with native wildlife. However, there are the issues of things like red-eared sliders that in our particular area here are considered non-native. And so as a clinician, it's really challenging trying to determine, kind of the scope of what I can provide for these animals. I will say I've helped with a study that was looking at finding ways of humanely euthanizing invasive species, which is an uncomfortable topic and again, really challenging. But I think something that's really important to me is finding, again, humane methods and ensuring that we treat these animals with consideration. Historically, reptiles in particular, a lot of people haven't really felt like they have pain or that they just don't have the same kind of consideration as our mammals, but it's just because they have different modalities. And so from my perspective, finding ways that are ensuring they, receive adequate analgesia, especially when you're working in field settings. And so that's something that while it's really difficult, I think it's very important work and it's really poignant and finding ways that we can, offer these animals a dignified death, if that is the path that we have to choose, is as a clinician, very, very important. Like historically, we just haven't given some of these animals the types of consideration that we do for others. And again, while I would love to be in a world where, and hopefully maybe someone can help with some policy that helps me, that I can help move these animals elsewhere. But in the meantime, trying to find ways of mediating that and giving those animals equal consideration is really important.
I think I just wanted to add quickly that even though that may not be a specific topic of study in the MAPP program, that there are portions of the classes where you talk about different philosophies, where you talk about different ways of communicating or framing an issue, where you talk about analyzing policy in general, and if getting into that space is something that you're interested in, this is definitely a program where you could pick up the skills to become fluent in making that conversation happen.
That's a good point. Thank you, Ariel. Let's see. Let's see, another question that is typically asked is, what was the most challenging aspects of the program for you? Would you guys like to go into that? For you?
Yeah, I don't mind going first. For me, the most challenging aspect was deciding what path I wanted to take. Um, because I, again, knew I was going to do an externship, but I wanted to get the most I possibly could out of the program, especially because the professors have such extensive networks. So I really was trying to figure out, do I do advocacy? Do I work in humane education? You know, what should I do next? So that was one of the hardest things that I struggled with. But again, that's where my mentor came in and then set up meetings for me to meet a whole bunch of different people in a variety of fields. So that way I could kind of, tell, would I be interested in this? I spent a couple days with different organizations, seeing if I liked what they were doing. But yeah, just, and it's the pressure I put on myself, but trying to make the most out of the experience and figure out what I wanted to do.
I have like a not like less school related. I would say the biggest challenge for me was I had a full-time job and I had to work and also go to school full time. So that was hard, but it's doable. I did it. So if I can do it, you can do it. But thinking about how you're going, like, what's your life going to look like for the, 12 to 18 months that you're going to be working through this program, and making sure that you are comfortable with the direction that you're headed in, whether it's financially, whether it's time management. If you're thinking about like a potential career that you already have in mind, is this going to help you get there? So all of those big, like, personal questions that you have to ask yourself, and consider if you have any barriers, how you're going to address them, was probably the biggest challenge. Although in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't like so challenging that it was prohibitive. So you can totally do it. But just food for thought on that front.
I did not know you were working full-time in the program, Kaylee. How did you, not many people do that. A lot of people work part-time. That's
So
amazing.
So class was typically like Monday through Thursday, an occasional Friday morning, and then I would work Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. And so I would just, hey, had to do it. But I came through the other side just fine. And it also honestly helped me with time management in general. So it wasn't a bad thing. It was just not easy. But that's typically the path that I tend to lean towards anyway. Like, oh, if there's a clear path in front of me, I take the one that needs some brush clearing and walk that one. So that's just, I guess, my personality.
Impressive. Anyone else have a most challenging part of the program thought?
I will say that doing the research track and doing a mixed method study for my research project was definitely a challenge in terms of time, because doing the research track often extends the amount of time that you are in the program already, and then there's only a certain amount of time that you have. There literally is a deadline that you have to get things in. And so taking on such a big chunk for my research study was not something I regret, but it was an undertaking. It was an undertaking. And the program itself is certainly an undertaking as well. You are learning a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time compared to other graduate programs. And it, I think, demands a lot from you in terms of the writing assignments, the reading, all of that kind of stuff. And similarly to Bethany, I struggled with what I was going to do. Obviously, I ultimately chose the research track, but there were many, many weeks, I think, of me sitting in Shauna's office, of talking to my classmates and my fiance at the time, now husband, that of just like, you know, which one do I do and which one will be better for me in the long run, and will I be missing out on something if I do one over the other? Um, and I yeah, I think making those decisions, and then just the realizing, I think, that you're in the thick of a graduate program and like, oh, right, I've gotta, for me, the other context is that I graduated from undergrad in 2013 and then joined the MAPP program in 2018. So it had been a handful of years since I had been in an academic setting. So I had to readjust my mentality a little bit.
That makes sense. Catherine.
I just mentioned that I also was like, didn't go right out of school into the program. And then I feel like that kind of gave me an opportunity to kind of test the waters and like see kind of what things I like doing for a job versus just academically. I don't know if people who went right out of school were glad they kind of like got it out of the way and were able to move on, but I feel like I was able to get a lot out of it because I did. I think I was 29 maybe when I started. So I had worked for 7 years in 2 different jobs beforehand. I worked like directly in a research lab as a lab manager. And then my other job was the associate director of the undergraduate teaching labs at Boston College. So I designed the curriculum and the lab experiments for the undergraduate students. So I kind of had an idea, like going into it, what I wanted to get out of it.
I can maybe speak to the other side of that as someone who sort of came straight through undergrad. I mean, I guess, yes, in a perfect world, you'd have lots of experience already and sort of know what your interests are. But I think for me, the MAPP program was helpful for the opposite reason, because I didn't know what I was interested in, that I was sort of broadly interested in this field, but I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what career options in this space look like. And so I think for me, MAPP was really like a great introduction to a lot of those sort of questions, but it was also just time and space to like wrestle with those questions on my own and think about that. And I think it just having the curriculum be focused on, you know, sort of animals specifically, you're interested in everything. It's sort of a discrete area. And so then it kind of gave me time and space to think about, you know, what kinds of work I might find valuable, what my skills are, and how that maps onto the needs I see, and that kind of thing. So, and I felt sort of more than prepared coming from undergrad. You know, you're used to a certain kind of work cadence and that kind of thing, and so I didn't find the curriculum to be overly burdensome. I think I probably would have if I was in Kaylee's shoes, so that is just wildly impressive. But at least for me, you know, it all felt manageable, and also at the same time gave me space and time to think about what I want to do next. So certainly coming straight from undergrad, I wouldn't anticipate any problems. I think many of us kind of were straight through as well, and yeah, it was a great kind of introduction to all kinds of things in that respect.
If people are having a hard time thinking about the most challenging, maybe what was the most helpful? Or the best favorite something?
I think for me, one of the most enduring aspects of it was learning how to speak with different people and challenging your framework. And I feel like the MAPP program was really good about how to teach you to communicate with everyone from lay people and the public to legislature to veterinarians, et cetera, and kind of having those different areas to really facilitate having conversations at the level of that person and meeting them with their skill set. I personally, even though I am a veterinarian, I interact with the public all the time, whether that's people bringing me turtles, like Good Sam's bringing in wildlife, or at the museum where I work, I have a exhibit window. And so I'm basically on display when I'm doing procedures and exams, and I have a two-way mic system. And so people come and ask me questions. And so it can require a little bit of finesse to talk to people while you're like doing your job and trying to like look at a sea turtle's eyeball. But I feel like MAPP really prepared me for that. I remember not too long ago, I was doing an exam on a little frog, and this couple from South Africa came over and was just like up at the window and asking, hey, why are all of the whales in South Africa stranding? And I'm just like trying to do an exam on this little frog, which I feel like for a lot of people would be like totally difficult to pivot, but I was able to, in that moment, talk to them about what I knew about the cetacean strandings and then relate it back to the native species of North Carolina and kind of talk about things like climate considerations and things that bring it back to wildlife at large. And so having the ability to talk to those individuals and kind of bring your point back home is something that absolutely I use all the time, and definitely am so, so happy that I have MAPP to help me with that, because again, it is not something they teach you in vet school. And I think for someone that wasn't exposed to that, it would be really challenging in my current role.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is framing. It's one of the first things that Alan talks about in our program. And I can't look at things like any other way, especially working in policy, so before I worked with the Stop Puppy Mills campaign, I was working for Humane Society Legislative Fund, which is the the specific lobbying branch of the Humane Society of the United States. And so I went from federal to state and local, which is a little bit opposite of what some other people do. Neither here nor there, but it is something that you just come up against all the time, whether it's farm animals and people wanting to kill coyotes because they're pests versus the people who love to listen to them howl, and they're these like beautiful creatures that they feel a connection to, and it's just framing as something that you see being used all of the time in policy, in good and bad ways, depending on your perspective. And so that, I think, getting that concept into my head and looking at, being able to look at how different people are, what's the word I want to use? How people are portraying an issue, how they are holding it up to the public and sort of shaping it to say, here's how we want you to look at it, versus, another framing. That's just something that has stuck with me from day one. Oh, Ginny, you're on mute.
My computer just reminded me too. Thank you. I just see Alan just popped on, so that was perfect timing. He got to hear how you like his class. So did anyone else want to say anything? I think he's here to wrap things up for our remaining prospective students there.
So I've had the opportunity to speak on as part of the alumni panel a couple of times now, and I think one thing that I have often heard and that I often try to tell people that are interested in this program is that come into it with an open mind. Jenny mentioned this before. There are so many students that come in being like, I want to do wildlife, I want to do farm animal, I'm all in on companion animals, and then they sit in on a seminar or a particular class speaks to them, and they find themselves going in a different direction. But be prepared to double down as well. Like you might come into this program and be like, no, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And I also wanted to say that what you put into the program is often what you get out of it. Like there is obviously the baseline of the curriculum and what you are being given to be read, but there are people that you can connect with through the program. There are so many different rabbit holes that you can go down if you choose to. And I would just say keep an open mind to all of that, and that's really it. It's just a great network to be a part of.
Yeah, so yeah, to the alums, thank you all for joining in with the open house. This was all recorded, yes? So
Yes.
so other people will watch it too. Yeah, so Sarah, I hope you apply. I hope everybody applies, and it's well worth it. We have a lot of fun.
It's true.
Sarah, did you have any last questions or
Any last
thoughts? Especially for Dr. Ruckberg, now he's back.
No, I was just going to say thank you all for hosting this event. This was really great to be able to attend and learn more about the program.
You're welcome. Good. Thank you for attending.